everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. Today, America realizes we really need oil and that we completely rely on the rest of the world to provide us with oil, and problems can ensue from that. We figured that out in the early 1970s. Also, probably America's worst president we've ever had does more to relax tensions in the Cold War than anybody else, but it doesn't really get talked about because other than the stuff he does in foreign policy, it's kind of trash in American history. Anyway, let's put that into context. Let's get started. So America has the largest military on earth, them or Russia, give or take. Well, when you have a massive military, you need a lot of natural resources to run it. We saw that with Japan. One of the reasons they wanted to take over all this stuff in Asia is they needed natural resources for the military. America is going to be no different. Now, most of America's natural resources, America can get from America or from our friends. The big asterisk is on oil. America needs tons and tons and tons of oil, and we buy oil from around the country, or around the world. So this brings us to a very interesting situation that still pertains today, as this is being recorded, on how America gets their oil. Now, there's a whole bunch of different pie charts I can show because you can manipulate data and look at all different types of pie charts. America does get a lot of their oil present day from ourselves. About 40% at different places that I have seen. A lot of that is natural gas use, not gasoline use. Anyway, for the context of this course, I need to explain to you about this organization called OPEC. Now, OPEC is a bunch of countries that are all, a lot of them aren't necessarily big friends with America, and America aren't necessarily big friends with them. And many of the countries in this organization are in the Middle East. All right. So there are certain countries in the Middle East that America has had beef with, and we would probably not buy oil from them if we had a choice. All right. Because a lot of these countries in the Middle East, their main export is oil. They just dig it up from the ground. It doesn't really cost them anything to get it, but it's really valuable to the rest of the world. So they sell it for whatever they want to, basically what anybody will pay for. America or any country could really shut down a Middle East country's economy if we just chose not to buy from them. Because there's a bunch of countries in the Middle East and they all sell oil. We could just be like, oh, this country we don't like, we're not going to buy from you because America needs tons of oil. All right, so we're going to buy it. But if we just chose one small country not to buy from, we can make it up with all the other countries and it could shut down that country. So the Middle Eastern countries aren't dumb. They know that America could do that, or these other large oil-consuming countries could do that. So they get together and they create an organization called OPEC. The OPEC, O-P-E-C, stands for the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Basically, all those countries in the Middle East here, right, and a couple other places around the world, like Venezuela, they are going to join this organization. So they're all going to get their oil, and they're all going to basically put it in like one big vat, figuratively. Then sell oil to the rest of the world, including America, out of that one big vat. By doing so, America can't cut out one single country since everybody's oil is getting dumped together. Now, the countries that are contributing to OPEC basically get a cut of the proceeds based on how much they contributed. So, if a country contributes more to OPEC, they get a bigger piece of the pie. By doing this, America can't cut out a single country, so we're basically at the whim of all these countries in the Middle East, and a lot of the countries in the Middle East don't necessarily like America, and we're going to talk about that here in a second, but America desperately needs oil, and most of America's oil comes from OPEC. So we are very concerned at all times of what is happening in OPEC. Our society could shut down if we weren't getting OPEC oil because we don't have enough to fully function everything if OPEC didn't sell us oil. Even though we're getting some from other places, gotta have it from OPEC. We're actually going to see today there's a situation in which that actually happened and America pretty much shut down. But the question here is, why is America always interested in the countries that are part of OPEC and what they're doing? All right. How can OPEC affect America on a daily basis? So pause me, answer that completely, and we're going to get more into this story. All right. We're in the early 1970s. And something happens called the Yom Kippur War in the Middle East. And it's going to very much viciously affect America. So, when you talk about the Middle East, very little is simple. Not only is there a lot of drama, it's not new drama. It's drama that has existed for thousands of years because there's a lot of religious tension in the region. All right. The vast majority of the Middle East, and let me zoom in on this a little bit. This is the Middle East. The vast majority of the Middle East is Muslim. All right. So the problem becomes, and so most of the Middle Eastern countries, well, they occasionally have a skirmish with each other. They pretty much get along. Not always. That they have beef just like any other countries would. But religiously, it's pretty normal until the end of World War II, and a big monkey wrench gets thrown into the tensions in the Middle East. And it deals with the country of Israel or Palestine. So, the Holocaust happened in World War II. We talked about that, and it's absolutely horrific, where 6 million Jewish people were killed. That was so awful that after World War II, the Allies, the European nations, saw what had happened to the Holocaust, and everybody's so shocked about it. They're like, oh my gosh, the reason this happened and Jewish people couldn't flee Germany is Jewish people on earth had no homeland. There was no country that they could go to and have a homeland. So the Allies, led by America, says, all right, Israel, we can't let this happen. Tell you what, you just pick anywhere you want on earth, and that'll be your homeland, and we'll make sure that happens. So the the Jewish people, say, oh, well, we would like what is our promised land in our religious text, in the Old Testament of the Bible, in which we are given this land called Israel. And America and the Allies are like, sold, fantastic. Go on down there to Israel. That's your land now. I mean, so if you remember way back earlier in this course, we talked about the three Abrahamic religions: Israel, Muslims, Christianity. All three come from the story of Abraham. The story of Abraham basically is God telling Abraham, you and all your descendants have this land. This land being Israel or Palestine, whatever you want to call it, that piece of land. There is a disagreement in religious text on the major religions. Who is the rightful offspring of Abraham? All right. Is it the offspring where their descendants ended up being Jewish and then Christianity? Or is it the offsprings that ended up being Muslims? Muslims believe they rightfully owned the promised land given to Abraham by God. Jews and Christians feel like they are entitled to this promised land given to them by God and Abraham. So, to the very core, these very religious areas of the world fundamentally are going to disagree on who gets to own not just any piece of land, the land God chose for them. There is no compromise when it's entire religious ideals of your entire existence on earth. So, and when the Allies in America agreed to this, like, sure, Israel's yours, go make something of yourself, had no idea, what would entail from this. So, Jewish people moved down into Israel, and the ones that were already there, and basically legally, with the support of America, you see on this map here, all the green area is Palestine, which is the promised land held by Muslims, that they have pretty much get moved out of Palestine. The country no longer is called Palestine, it becomes called Israel. And you can see up to the 1960s and then even further on up to present day, the green splotches get much smaller, of pushing out the Muslims and becoming in a Jewish homeland. So, Who do you think doesn't like this? If you said probably a lot of the Muslims who feel like Jewish people are stealing their land, you would be correct. So not only is there a lot of hostility in the Middle East here, and you see Israel's right there in between all these Muslim countries, not only is there a lot of hostilities against Israel because a lot of the Muslims feel like Jewish people are stealing their homeland. Keep in mind, the Israelites literally feel like they have a right to this land and it had been stolen from them much further before, because both sides believe religiously they have a God-given right to this land. You can see how there's going to be tension here. On top of all that, how do you think such a small group of Jewish people are able to spread out so quickly and take this land back from Muslims? Well, because Israel had big friends, specifically in America. So America 100% supports Israel as Israel is pushing out the Muslims. In large part, and it really seems to me, America kind of realized that America had kind of started this whole thing by being like, you just take over whatever you want. And then, instead of admitting that they're wrong and trying to come up with a solution, maybe a different, it was, America has too far in and now has to absolutely support Israel because these other countries in the Middle East hate Israel with a passion and consistently in the 1950s and the 1960s attack Israel. Now, Israel's a small country. A lot of these countries here are very large, by comparison, large, strong militaries. Israel wins all the time. Because you know who's given Israel all of their military equipment? Is America. So, America fully funds Israel. Here's another interesting factoid. Since Israel, obviously, not invited to the cool kid table in the Middle East, Israel is not part of OPEC. So, Israel has to buy oil from OPEC. OPEC won't sell to Israel because they hate them. Because Israel is unable to buy oil from OPEC, they have to get it from their friends, which is America. But, Mr. Wagstaff, you said America doesn't have their own oil. That's right. America buys it from OPEC and then sells it to Israel, usually at no markup. It's basically at cost, so that Israel can be fully functioning. Again, America has fully bought into this. Israel is the rightful owner of this land. The Yom Kippur War happens in the early 1970s, in which Egypt and Syria here preemptively attack Israel in October of 1973. It lasts a few weeks, but when this attack happens and America comes to the aid of Israel, Egypt and Syria, which are Muslim countries. Now, Egypt and Syria are not big contributors. I don't think Egypt's involved in OPEC, but the rest of the Middle East is, and the rest of the Middle East, being Muslim, supports Syria and Egypt, and most of OPEC is. When OPEC sees America supports Israel in this, OPEC cuts off oil to America. Now, basically, the reason OPEC does this is they know the only way that Israel's military functions is with oil. And they're getting it from America. So at first, OPEC says, boom, we're going to cut your supply in half. Because you basically either are going to have enough oil to function in your country or fund Israel. Now, America can be stubborn, and when, presented with this option to shut down your own country or help out your friends, which one do you think America takes? I bet they said, sorry, Israel, you're on your own. Oh, no, America is stubborn. They're basically stopped being gas for like 6 months in the early 1970s. If you have parents or grandparents that are alive, then they remember this. All of a sudden, there was no more oil. Because any oil America had basically got shipped over to Israel to try to defend them. So even though this war ends with American support relatively quickly in about 3 or 4 weeks, and Egypt and Syria angrily step back and realize they can't take over Israel because they have American support, the embargo lasts on America for a few months, and it was crucial. Not only could people not find gas, it would basically shut down society. But it really changed the way America views the rest of the world. Getting involved in what, America would feel like this is a skirmish, doesn't affect us, fundamentally could shut down America. Not only that, America has to have oil for the military. So it starts from this point on being a very touchy foreign policy worldwide. America treats countries a certain way. Unless they have oil, and then they're treated a whole different way. Sometimes countries with oil can get away with a lot more than countries that don't. Sometimes countries with oil get preemptively invaded, like Iraq in 2003. But America's desperate need for oil, up to present day when this is recorded, really does change the foreign policy. And this is a great example of how what in Americans' minds is a little skirmish over in the Middle East that shouldn't affect us absolutely shut down American society. And the necessity of having oil is one of America's most strongly focused on aspects of foreign policy up to present day. So the question here is, why did our support of Israel anger many of the Middle Eastern countries? So why does America support Israel? All right, start with that. And then, why does us supporting Israel make the other countries in the Middle East, many of which are in OPEC, why does it make them angry? Answer that completely. Pause me if you need to, and we're going to move on. So America gets a new president in the 1970s. All right, actually 1968, but his name is Richard Nixon. Now, in world history, and we talk about Richard Nixon, and we talk about the Cold War, which is this whole unit is on. Richard Nixon is in a really good light. What he does is pretty impressive as far as calming tensions down between the Soviet Union and the United States. You probably are not familiar with this. You may have never heard of this guy, but if you have, he is America's worst president. He gets that distinguished honor because he's the only president we've ever had that quits. He's like, middle fingers to everybody else. I quit. I'm out. He tried to get a leg up in an election, did some wire, did a bunch of shady stuff, and then got caught in it. And instead of like facing the music, he quit. But that's all like other domestic stuff in the United States. His actual foreign policy, historically speaking, looking back on it, it's like Richard Nixon, the guy who America considers rightfully, he quit the presidency. You got to be the worst president when you quit it. America's worst president probably was like the adult America needed in a very tense situation as it deals with foreign policy. So Richard Nixon gets elected. He got elected in 1968 saying, get me elected. I want to bring troops home from Vietnam. Now at this point, Vietnam is like over a decade long, and he gets elected. He does try to poke around a little bit to see if America can have any success in Vietnam, realizes they can't. Says, all right, bring them on home. And then Vietnam becomes communist. All right. But then he realizes something very interesting. Vietnam didn't lead to the domino effect. Maybe we've been kind of overly intense on this. So Nixon comes up with a new idea, and it's called Detente. It's spelled Detente. Richard Nixon was too smart for his own good a lot of times, but it's called Detente, right? Even though it's spelled Detente. This is his goal. Decrease tensions with these other countries, right? There's no reason to be all super squirrely, all right? Basically, hey, let's be practical about this. Real politics, another concept he had about practical politics. But his main focus here is détente. Relax tensions between Russia and the United States. Because, had we invaded North Vietnam, that could have caused World War III. We already had the Cuban Missile Crisis the previous decade called World War III. Before that, we had the Berlin Air. We're this close to World War III like all the time. He's like, let's not do that. This is dumb. We've been on the edge of dying for decades now. This is dumb. Let's get together and talk it out. Let's talk. not all these big shows of force. Let's get together and talk and see if we can't like survive and actually talk to each other as opposed to keep threatening to blow each other up. So the question is, why is the policy of détente an important step to avoid an all-out war between the United States and the Soviet Union? So pause me, answer that completely, and we'll move on. So Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon is not a fun-loving guy. This is not his personality. He's very intense. He's very smart. He's a little paranoid. He's got a lot of character flaws. So he knows on paper détente is good, which makes the pictures I'm going to show you, to me, who kind of expert in U.S. history, comical. All right. But before I get into the comical, let me tell you the main situation here. Richard Nixon in 1972 does something that is mind-blowing to many Americans and many people who have been around for a while. He hops on a plane, flies to China, and meets Mao Zedong, the leader of China. Now, remember, Mao Zedong is the communist leader of China. He's been here for a while now. All right? This is the 1970s. All right, he's been in charge for like 25 years now. Chiang Kai-shek was still the guy that America was acknowledging was the leader. He's not even in the country. He's on Taiwan. Richard Nixon says that's dumb. So Russia or America and China, super tense relationship. Nobody has even visited China or had any connection with China in over 20 years. All right. You know, the Korean War, we're talking about nuking them with MacArthur. You got, Chinese support with North Vietnam and the Vietnam War. But we've never actually talked to China. Nixon's like, I'm going to do it. He hops on a plane, flies over here, meets Mao Zedong. And like the first thing he says, I'm sure he kind of let them know this to show up. They weren't just going to be like, come on over. He's like, Chiang Kai-shek's not the leader of China. And Mao Zedong's like, yeah, no crap, he's not. And he's like, you are. And America now acknowledges that you are a communist country. Now, that seems dumb. They've been a communist country for a long time, but America just refuses to acknowledge it. Nixon's like, I'm going to acknowledge it. You're a communist country. Not only are you a communist country, you're the rightful leader, and you, Mao Zedong, you now have the vote on the UN Security Council. So that's 2 communist countries of the 5 on the UN Security Council. Now, all it takes is 1 no vote, so it's not as catastrophic as you would think. But this is a huge concession. And Nixon's like, all right, I don't necessarily like communism, but you're a legit powerful country, and we need to work together and get along. Even if we have different ideologies on how to do things, we got to get along on this blue circle called Earth. All right? So Nixon shows up, and then it's like kind of like the whole world's like, oh my gosh, like is America adulting here? Like compromising? Because America's all be like, no compromise, blow things up. Doesn't always work out with us or work out for us. See Vietnam War. So Nixon's here for 7 days in China. People have never seen China. So Nixon goes around and has to experience and gets photographed and all this stuff. Keep in mind, Nixon is not a friendly person. That's not his. That's just not his personality. All right. So pictures like him trying to eat Chinese food with chopsticks, he's holding his shoulder like, what is this? And just seeming really uncomfortable in these pictures. He's trying to put on a good face. I mean, it's a great thing that he's doing. His personality just doesn't fit. This man is taking one for the team to try to create some positivity. This one here, it's like he's like, hey, let's go for a walk, and then all of a sudden he realizes he's like in a parade, and he's like looking at the sun. Like this seems very dictatorship-ish, and I imagine he's like starts walking a little faster. He's like, I want to get out of the picture frame as fast as possible. This is not the image I want. Or it's like he's looking at the Red Army here. Probably the most famous one, we'll call the one that doesn't seem awkward, is the picture of Richard Nixon here in China with his wife on the Great Wall of China. He was treated great. He hangs out for 7 days. He just tours China. This is very important because when Nixon comes home, there's really no more tension between the United States and China. Granted, they're still communist. America's a democracy. Politically, we don't like each other, but we're going to work with each other at this point. And it like détente, you're like, okay. All we had to do is just acknowledge what was an actual fact, that they were communist, that had been the actual fact for a quarter century. All right. But it really shows that America is going to make an honest effort to work with people with different viewpoints, which is kind of new for America. So the question here is, why was it such a big deal that Nixon visited China? First president to ever do so. All right, so pause me, answer that completely, and we'll move on. So Nixon had a long-term goal set up here. He knew to show up and be nice to China because as soon as he gets back home from America, he sits by the phone and he waits. Because right next to China is Russia. And I imagine Russia's like, what is this guy like? Is he being normal? That's not what we're used to, like threatening to blow each other up. So once Nixon leaves, I imagine China or Russia sneaks down to China like they're living things. Like, hey, China, is that like for real? And China's like, yeah, like he for real lets us be on the UN. It's like all official. Like there's nothing shady about it. He just wanted to be nice. And Russia goes, huh? Well, you think he'd be cool with us? And China's like, I don't know. He might be. Why don't you give him a call? See what's up. A couple weeks later, China calls because he visits China in February. This happens in May. More than a couple weeks in. And the phone rings in the White House. I doubt they're calling on the red phone to hotline, which basically says, we're nuking you. Probably not the red phone call. But there was a communication, and I imagine the phone rings, and Nixon picks up on the first ring because he's waiting for this. And Russia's like, hey, I saw you were being cool with China. You want to come over here and be cool with us? And Nixon says, absolutely. And Nixon, these are countries that have been threatening to wipe each other out. Nixon gets on the plane and travels to Russia. Nikita Khrushchev is no longer in charge. Oh, I should have looked up. I don't know if he died or if he just like they had a change out. He was getting old. So the new guy in charge here in Russia, so it went Stalin, Nikita Khrushchev, is a guy named Brezhnev. All right. So Brezhnev, this is the guy he's shaking hands with, gets off the plane. He's shaking hands with Brezhnev, the leader of the Soviet Union. And Nixon's like, everybody's like happy, like whatever. And they sit down. Now, this one isn't so much a tourist thing because this was actually Nixon's end plan here at Detente. He did all that stuff with China to let the world know I'm different so that he can sit down and have this talk with Brezhnev. So they sit down. So this is not really a sightseeing tour. This is a, hey, yeah, I know we've about wiped each other off the planet about 3 times over the last 2.5 decades. Let's not do that. And Brezhnev's like, I agree. What are we going to do? And so Nixon and Brezhnev sit down like adults and come up with this thing called SALT, which is an abbreviation for the Strategic Arms Limitations Treaty. And it puts limits on both America and the Soviet Union on how many nukes and intercontinental ballistic missiles that you can have. This is what everybody had to agree to. You had to, all right, guys, your intercontinental ballistic missiles, which means the missiles that can be launched at this point because technology has gotten better from America and hit Russia, or the missiles that can leave Russia and hit America. All right. You can only have, and they all have hydrogen bombs on them. You can only have Russia, you can have 1,550, and America, we'll only have 1,054. Keep in mind, like 5 of these would wipe out the Earth. All right, so hooray. But they each get 5,700 warheads, which is the actual nuclear bombs. Again, they both are allowed 5,700 hydrogen bombs. But they're going to limit the amount of missiles that can carry them. Does SALT do anything? No, but yes. We can still wipe each other out 1,000 times over. But we both agreed we got too much. Let's tone it down a little bit. The fact that Russia and the United States are willing to talk is a huge turning point in the Cold War. Because as long as you're willing to talk, you're less likely to nuke each other. Neither one of them want to give up their end goal, which is to take over the world. But after 25 years of feeling like you're going to nuke each other, People are tired of that. All right. And SALT, and it ends up being a SALT 2, which is they do it. The Strategic Arms Limitations Treaty is very important because even though everybody knows that both are trying to manipulate the situation, it is an honest effort to not have a nuclear war. So SALT is a huge relief to the rest of the world that America and Russia are willing to talk now. And the presidents after Nixon will continue to talk with Russia. So Nixon, who's a complete turd in American history, absolute worst president we've had, dude quits the presidency. All right. As far as foreign policy goes in the Cold War, absolutely fantastic. So the question here is, why was the SALT deal that Nixon made with the Soviet Union such a massive step towards lasting peace? So pause me if you need to. I answer that completely. But that's all we got today. I'll see you guys tomorrow.